Hey, I'm sorry, I'm still in my PJs and have crazy hair and makeup, and you can definitely see where the dog scratched me on my head about an hour ago. I have to leave back for school in like an hour because I am currently on Thanksgiving break, and I brought books. Long story short, all my books are here, and I'm just gonna film this before I leave, so that's why I'm at my aunt's house. There's my bookshelf. And thus, this is my November wrap-up. In November, I read 7 books, which I think is pretty good, considering I had so many projects this month, so many essays to write this month. I think a big reason why I didn't read more is because I'm stuck on the book I'm currently reading, and I just chose a lot of meh books this month. So yeah, let's get into what I read. The first book that I read was Soundless by Rochelle Mead. I have an entire review up for this book if you want to go check that out. But this book follows a girl named Faye who lives on a kingdom on the top of a mountain, and they're completely isolated from the world below. On the mountain, they mine, I think, gold or some sort of valuable mineral, and they send that down to the people at the base of the mountain in exchange for food. The twist is, everyone in this village is blind, or no, deaf. So this just follows them, and them growing hungrier and hungrier, and mayhem happening, and the main character having to find a solution and find out what's at the bottom of the mountain. This book is by Rochelle Mead, so it had amazing writing. I really liked that part of it. I feel like my voice is so low because I just woke up. Also, the idea is super interesting to me. I loved the idea that they were all deaf because that just added a really unique point of view with not being able to speak. It was all sign language, and so it added little tiny niblets of good stuff. Like, for instance, if their hands were full, they couldn't sign. This is my phone case. They wouldn't be able to sign anything because their hands were full, and I thought that was, again, just something interesting to add. But my biggest downfall for this book was that it just went too fast. There wasn't enough development of the world and the relationship in it. It is like less than 300 pages, I think 270 pages for a fantasy standalone, and I just think that did not do it justice, and I would have liked to see more, but I did enjoy the story, and the characters and everything went by super fast. The characters went by fast. That made no sense, but I did like it. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read is one of my favorites of the year, one of my new favorites of all time. I'm in love with it so much. This is The Opposite of Loneliness by Marina Keegan. Marina Keegan is a girl that wrote a lot of essays and short stories, and she even got published in like the New York Times. She graduated from Yale and then 5 days later was killed in a car accident. This book is just a collection of some of her stories and essays, and I adored it. Marina is an amazing author, and I'm sure if she was still alive, I would absolutely purchase one of her novels. This was just so good. What can you say? I mean, everything was written beautifully. Some of the ideas in this are just flawless. I connected with a lot of it. It was just a beautiful book with wonderful ideas. And I don't read a lot of nonfiction, nor do I read a lot of short stories, so this is amazing. For the people who have read this, I'll just tell you my favorites right now. They are The Opposite of Loneliness, obviously, Cold Pastoral, and Challenger Deep. Those were the ones that just, like, hit me. They were so good, but I have a ton of favorite quotes in here. If you're not a big reader of nonfiction, or if you've never read a collection of essays and short stories before, I highly recommend this book. It's so good. 5 stars, absolutely. I loved this book. Now we're transitioning from that to Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. I filmed a review for this, but it will not be up until January, so keep an eye out for that. But this book follows a girl named Etta and also a boy named Nicholas. Nicholas is from the 1700s and he's a ship sailor, and Etta is from 2015 and she's just a normal violin playing girl. This book follows time travel, so it's about how their stories intertwine and her family's dark history and stealing artifacts and mothers hiding things from daughters. You know, that whole trope of the chosen one. What can I say? I did not like this book. I think, okay, first of all, let me say, this book, a lot of people are going to like it. I just don't like Alexandra Bracken. That's why I wasn't a fan. I just do not get along with Alexandra Bracken's writing. I don't like it. there's so much fluff and so much unnecessary inner monologue, it takes forever to read. And I ended up being so bored in the first half, I just skim read the last half, and I didn't miss anything, even though I was only reading the dialogue. And this book just has no hook. Like, from the synopsis, I had no idea what this was about, even though I'd read the synopsis like 10 times. The first half of this book, you don't know where it's going, it's kind of boring. I just couldn't get interested in this book no matter what I did. And then once we did get into the time travel-y interesting stuff, it wasn't explained good enough for me. So I was kind of confused and at that point exasperated with the entire premise of the book, so I just kind of gave up and skim read. I ended up not liking this at all. Other people might like it, I just couldn't find anything good about it. The characters were bland, the historical fiction was boring. I gave this 1.5 stars, but I rounded it down to 1 star on Goodreads. If you didn't like The Darkest Minds because you didn't like the writing style, I would not recommend picking that up, but I know a ton of people liked The Darkest Minds, so give it a try if it fancies you, but I was not a fan. Moving on, the next book I read last month was Breakable by Tamara Weber. This is the second book in the Easy duology. This is the second book to Easy by Tamara Weber, which was one of my favorite books of all time. One of my favorite books of this year. That book follows a girl named Jacqueline. I mean, this book does too. It follows a girl named Jacqueline who, this guy, helps her out in a sticky situation that involved sexual assault, and so the entire book follows just consent and rape culture and all that good stuff, and it was done the best way possible. It's so healthy and beautiful and consensual, and I loved it. This book follows the guy's perspective, so it's a retelling, but also it has flashbacks to his childhood. I thought I was gonna love this because I loved the original story, but more and more I'm realizing I just am not a fan of companions. I think I need to do an entire video about this, but I think it was unnecessary, didn't really add anything. Like, as someone who loved the first book, I just didn't enjoy this one, because I care about this character, but I think the backstory was unnecessary, because you already heard about everything that happens to him in Jacqueline's perspective, so it's like, you don't need to see it. It just seems like it completely repeated what the first book was all about, except this one had less of a moral, because in the first one it's kind of like, okay, be strong for yourself. It just didn't add anything to the series for me, but again, it was my favorite book once over again, so it was kind of enjoyable in that sense that I do enjoy the original storyline, but added nothing spectacular. I would recommend only reading this if you're interested in Lucas's backstory. If not, no issues there, but I gave this book 3 stars. The next book I read was Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover. This is my second Colleen Hoover book. The first one was Hopeless, which I hated, so I was going into this one with high expectations. Let's just say, emerged still not a big fan. This book follows a girl, I don't even remember her name, Sydney. She finds out that her boyfriend is cheating on her with her best friend, so in a short-term sense, she moves across the apartment complex thing to a guy that she barely knows, but he's a music writer, and shenanigans ensue. There's several things that I had an issue with this book that I just could not get over. The first is that the boy she moves in with has a girlfriend, and new adult needs to quit this, but I can't stand books where half of the plot is, oh, you have a girlfriend, we can't be together, oh no, because it's such an old trope, and I'm tired of having all these cheating situations, and we know it's gonna happen, and that led to my biggest problem of the book. This was entirely too dramatic. There was so much angst, there was too much emotion. Sydney literally cries 5 times per chapter. It's so annoying. The entirety of this book is just angst and drama, and some people might like that, but I was so over it. Ridge, the guy in this book, I wasn't a fan of. I don't know if it's Colleen Hoover or his personality, but the feminist inside me, he would say things like, he hits like a girl, and I would be like, wow, what do girls hit like? Tell me about that. And it's like small things like that Colleen Hoover does just bugs the crap out of me, and she does it in both books I've read by her. She handles mental illness topics so badly, in my opinion. This book was just frustrating. It was fast though, because both Colleen Hoover books I've read I flew through, even though they were just drama-ridden and not executed very well. I do plan on reading Slammed. Hopefully that will be the one book by her that I actually like. I do plan on reading more of her because even though they're not the best books I've read, they are enjoyable in the end, but this was so angsty, I did not enjoy it. I'm sorry if this is one of your favorite books of all time. And in general, I'm just not a fan of books that revolve around music because there's something about it I can't place that it's so corny to me, you know? Maybe it's just another overused trope, but I only gave this book 2.5 stars. The next book that I read this month, I read for class, but I loved it so much, I'm going to talk about it like it wasn't for class. This book is The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. A couple of months ago, I asked you guys if I should have bought this because we had a choice between 2 books, and everyone said this book's amazing, and I agree. I loved it wholeheartedly. This book is a memoir, so it follows Jeanette and her life. It follows her as a child growing up, and it's all about her family and her parents and how they raised their family, moving around, and them being independent, and her father being an alcoholic. And it is so interesting. I read this book while I was in an academic mindset, so having to talk about this book like a real book is new and interesting. So, here's all my notes for school that I wrote, and I'm like, the motif of fire, and just stuff like that. So, how to talk about this like a normal human being, let's see. I thought this book went by really quickly. It's such a quick read, and for a book for school, I was really surprised by that. The stories in this are so interesting and weird that it seems like it's not real, which I think if a memoir can make you stop and go, wait, seriously? That's a good memoir. This book is really inspiring, and I can't say enough good things about it. It was so interesting, and I think it has a lot of great themes in it. It's easy to follow. Anyone could read it. It's just a good story. I mean, that's all I can say about it. I gave it 5 stars. I would highly recommend it. If you've never read memoir before or you're trying to get more into it, this is a good place to start. And they're possibly making a movie with Jennifer Lawrence, so... And the last book that I read this month was The Martian by Andy Weir. This book took me so long to get into that I eventually found the audiobook, which may or may not be on YouTube, and you may or may not be able to listen to it for free, but don't tell anyone I told you that. This book is so popular right now, and I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of it, but this book is about a man who gets stuck on Mars and has to survive by himself. Initial thoughts were, okay, cool, great idea. I am terrified of outer space, so this was going to be interesting for me, but I was bored. This book is literally rocket science. It's so scientific and there's so much chemistry. The reason why I'm an English major is because I hate that. I couldn't get into it because the entire first half of the book is the main character, Mark, being like, okay, I need water. Let's take these hydrogen atoms and these oxygen atoms, and it was driving me nuts. And I put that on Goodreads and people were like, it's a book about space, what are you expecting? But still, like, if I'm reading for enjoyment, I don't want to open a book and have the task of being burdened with all this science. So it was really hard for me to go back to and pick up, but again, once I got the audiobook, it went by faster. And a lot of people say they like this book because it's humorous, and I agree. It does have a great tone, it's so sarcastic, and Mark just has such a cynical personality, and I liked it. But on the other hand, I feel like he used a lot of that cynicism and sarcasm to cover up what he may have been truly feeling. I don't know if that makes sense, but if I was trapped on Mars by myself, I would have a meltdown, and I would be terrified for my life. And I know he's an astronaut, and he's trained to think a certain way in survival situations, and that might not occur to him, but I was kind of upset that every single time there was a time for him to show emotion, like, oh no, I messed up, this is scary, he would replace that with either scientific knowledge or sarcasm and humor, and again, it's probably his coping mechanism, that's probably the most appropriate and realistic thing, but I would have liked to see more emotion rather than just this sarcasm throughout the entire book. So I kind of had a disconnect from him because we were different in that way. But one compliment I do have for this is the audiobook really complements the diary format of this. I liked that. I think it was interesting, but kind of dragged toward the end. I mean, there's two ways this book can go, obviously. Either he dies or he gets saved. And you might think that's a spoiler, but think about it. That's the only two solutions. Whenever I first saw on the inside an astronaut blurb of this, I was like, wow, interesting, yeah, but the only reason an astronaut blurb this is because an astronaut might be the only person to actually understand what's going on in this book. Major props to the author for doing all the research that must have gone into this, but it just went over my head. It was an enjoyable story, but I just wasn't the hugest fan. It's probably going to be a better movie than it is a book, but I only gave it 3 stars. So thank you all for watching this video. I'm going to go back to school now. I hope you all will stick around for my December TBR coming up soon. Let me know what you read this month or if you've read any of the books that I read. And until next time, hope you're having a nice life. Goodbye, everyone.